Let us continue with our story as we delve into this narrative. After that encounter, the west wind was gracious to the ship and to the sailors, because the ship, as it were, glided upon the wide open ocean with effortless ease to its destination, being directed by the captain and the navigator, who used celestial navigation, stars, sun, moon, and other tools like compasses and charts to determine the ship's position and course. When the ship's captain came back to reality from his daydream, from his stupor, one of his assistants gave him a freshly picked young coconut with the top cut off to drink to his heart's content and delight, and then one of the slave sellers handed him a big piece of soft, big juicy sugar cane to exercise his eating and digestion apparatus. Meanwhile, some of the slave catchers and village leaders were engaged in horse, mule, and donkey races to entertain the new arrivals, and to add some welcomed excitement to the ship's crew as well. There were also a few beautiful and young females there that would extend a measure of pleasure to the crew from a sexual standpoint. Along with the designated and privileged village female farmers were there with their small farm produce of okra, sweet potatoes, yams, cassava, and regular meats and other ground produce that would be used as provisions for the next leg of the triangle route to America, Brazil, or Jamaica. But now the captain was ready to step ashore and do the people's business of getting the prisoners ready for the journey to America, Brazil, and the West Indies. After several days of resting and checking on the captured captives in the holding areas, it would soon be time to be on the prowl, after realizing that the few hundreds in the holding pens would not and could not fill this large slave ship. And so, in a few days' time, the slave merchants would be visiting many villages to buy more captured prisoners for the shipment to take back to the captain and his ship. The intended raid was already decided upon by the slave merchants and the African slave sellers. In a few days, their raid will be focused on a village in the North Country, and one of their African village informants from one of the nearby villages had informed and enlightened them that there would be a funeral on a special day soon. Hence, they should carry several persons with chains, dogs, doctors, and guns to capture those prisoners. And so, the talebearer next door, or in the next village, just confirmed what Bob Marley said many years ago in his song, "Only your friend knows your secret, and only he can reveal it."
We appreciate your indulgence. Watch until the end and give this story a thumbs up so that we can produce more stories like this one for you.
Now the main village chief's wife was a beloved fixture in the village for decades, and who was a midwife and nurse for several villages in the surrounding area, who had an accident and was sick for a long time. But because there was no modern medicine in those ancient times, she eventually succumbed to her sickness and died. The funeral was set, but because of the slave atmosphere and the catch, carry, and sold landscape, every villager was on high alert. However, for this important funeral ritual, all precautions were taken against that threat, and the villagers were ready for the worst-case scenario, due to the fact that the slave merchants and slave catchers realized that large groups were feeding frenzy for the slave catchers and the slave merchants. Chief Loigus Epayamai was the village chief of Edifinia village in the far reaches of the Cameroon mountain region of central West Africa, near Mount Oku. This region is beautifully landscaped with high plateaus and a mountain range that includes Mount Oku. This country was first named Rio dos Cameros, which in Portuguese means River of Prawns or Shrimp River. Later it became known in English as Cameroon, or the African country of Cameroon. That was where the chief lived with his 5 wives and their 15 children and 10 grandchildren in the 16th century. The first wife, Queen Amara, was the village nurse and midwife, and she had 5 assistants who helped her regularly with the baby deliveries in many community villages in the area. But on that unfortunate day, about midday, she along with 2 of her 5 assistances, Nana and Arima, were walking carefully and daintily on the dirt road on their way back from the neighboring village of Tumbai, where they had gone to attend to a woman with a difficult pregnancy who had taken in and was ready to deliver her baby. After a successful delivery, she and her helpers and the family of the happy mother were feeling elated for another successful childbirth, a bouncing baby boy delivery. She never charged for her midwife child delivery service, yet she paid her assistants for their time spent with her during the female villagers' children's deliveries, even as these assistants learned the art of child delivery and midwifery. Living in this village also was Mama Kwame, the spiritual healer and Obia woman, who professes to be able to tell fortune and future events. But none of her fortune-telling ever came through or were realized, else she would have informed the village chief of what would befall his beloved wife and the beloved village nurse and midwife after the many days of non-stop rain. Lady Apaime had been the village nurse and midwife for several villages and for several years. They had traveled to the nearby village early in the morning before daylight by using an oil lamp torch to see their way to their destination. The oil used in the lamp was made from palm oil that was removed by a boiling and extraction method. Some lamps also used oils made from the fat of animals. They had seen the delivery of hundreds of newborn babies in her village and several other villages in the region as well. However, several days before there had been torrential rainfall that caused a lot of damage to roads, walkways, water culverts, riverbanks, trees, and infrastructural damage like huts and animal housing. In this area, there were rolling hills, grassy valleys, green landscape, a river, and several cool water springs. Lady Apaime, the midwife, walked slowly on the water-filled road filled with potholes, but with her eyes peeling and scanning the road conditions and her surroundings at the same time as she walked slowly and stepping daintily and carefully while pondering the difficulty of living under such horrible conditions. On reaching a certain point on their return trip, lo and behold, about halfway home to her village, her right foot got caught into a tree root on the road that the rain had washed away the dirt, leaving the root dangerously bare in the middle of the road covered by water. Her foot got caught, she stumbled and fell and broke her right hip and right foot. One of her assistants, Arima, ran to the village and made the alarm about the accident. Many villagers, including her husband and some of his children, came with a mule-drawn cart and took her back to the village. These mule and donkey carts can navigate rough paths and uneven roads, not to mention water-filled road tracts. Moreover, these donkey-driven carts were basically a vital part of the transportation system to get around on the roads and in the bush country and farms. The chief sourced all the help he could from near and far, but his wife never fully recovered from her illness, and the witch doctor, who many believe has the ability to heal the sick, communicate with the spirit world, and guide the souls of the dead, could not help or help her either. She took a turn for the worst and died. Because, without the right medical treatment and the right medicine, it seems she got an infection, and the shaman or bush doctor could not help her. She died 2 weeks ago, and the feasting and merriment has been going on for 10 days now, but today she will be buried. To preserve her body after she died, the female family members washed her carefully. Then the bush doctor cut her stomach open, removed her internal organs, and dried out all the substance from her body by using a special salt, natron, that has great drying properties. This salt's ability to absorb moisture is what allows it to dry out the body, thus preventing quick decomposition. Then, after washing the internal organs and drying them in the sun, the bush doctor placed them back inside the body before the embalming took place. After which, the body was covered daintily and carefully in colorful sheets by the female family members. These special funeral designs often represent aspects of their culture, such as history, religion, birth, death, burial, and social status, but in general reflected a taste of the African history, beliefs, and culture. Truly, West Central African clothing has a rich history that includes the use of natural materials, symbolic designs, and intricate patterns. It has been noted in written and oral form that early West African clothing was made from bark cloth, furs, animal skins, and hides. Men wore loincloths or aprons, while women wore a wrap around their waists or breasts. Further, beaded aprons and skirts were worn with bells added to some. Young women typically wore skirts, but married women wore full-body wraps and cloaks, and is made by dyeing and decorating the cotton material. It is important to note that death rituals in the ancient African society were most times not without some sort of drama and excitements of sort. Many African communities celebrate their dead through a variety of rituals and ceremonies that they believe mark the transition of the deceased to the afterlife. Just like the beliefs of the ancient Egyptians, whereby the dead in Egypt would be buried with various items like gold, riches, clothing, food, and even a boat that they believe would ferry or carry the dead to another better and brighter world. And in Africa, the Yoruba people of Nigeria and Benin Republic may wear a common clothing called a aso ebi. While today, families and friends of the deceased produce clothing with the deceased photo and birth and death dates. There is also the horn blowing ceremony, where cow horns are blown to summon the spirits of the deceased. Further, there is the crying ceremony, where some would mourn the deceased by crying, singing, and dancing around the dead lifeless body. However, there can also be paid mourners or weeping people who are paid to perform this activity. Nevertheless, music and dancing are an important part of many traditional African societies. There are also the coffin dancers dancing with the dead and the dancing pallbearers. Many early African villages believed in burying the dead in their ancestral land, where the spirit of the dead would join with those who died before, and the newly departed buried person would also join with the spirit world. On this sunny summer morning in Chief Loigus Apaimai village, the sun cast a warm, friendly, and beautiful picture on the horizon. The morning was bright and sunny, with no rain in sight, and after the brilliant early morning had passed, it was a delightful day. So, yes, indeed, it was a lovely day in the neighborhood for the burial of a special lady, a mother, a wife, a grandmother, a friend of the villagers, and the village nurse. The death and funeral crying or mourning is different from ordinary crying. The loud, grief-stricken crying by the men is a deep, loud crying, which is accompanied by unusual vocal utterances. The crying by the women mourners is also a distinctive, unique wailing and mourning cry that is very rhythmic, distinctive, high-pitched, and very soulful and colorful, with heart-rending sounds, which can often be heard miles around in the rural villages. When anyone hears this wailing sound, they know that someone is deceased from the village. There are no other times that women will cry like that. Today, the final day of mourning, the villagers woke up to greet the rhythm of the sunshine and the reality of the death of the village mother. The funeral revelers would march to the graveside while singing songs and playing various musical instruments, including the talking drums, the djembe, homemade harps, the kalimba, and the chordophones. But the ancestral burial place was not very far from the village, so this great crowd was getting ready for the body to be taken out of the house, in the coffin, on the shoulders of family members and friends, so that the march can begin. Crying at funerals is a big deal for some African families. Some may not be able to cry. Therefore, many hires professional mourners to do their crying for them. Actually, loud crying and wailing are an important part of many African cultures when someone dies, which can also indicate the social standing of the deceased. As in this case where the chief's wife and the village midwife had died, it was quite appropriate indeed. Today the Chief Loigus Apaimai, would finally put his wife, his queen, to rest in their ancestral burying ground, just a few furlongs from the village. Here the queen of the village would be finally put to rest. Her father and mother were buried there, her husband's father and mother, along with their fifth son, who was torn apart by wild animals while hunting in the nearby forest for bush meat for the family. His remains were also buried there. It was a peaceful and tranquil afternoon. Earlier in the day, all preparations were made by the village chief and his family to say goodbye to his dear wife, mother, grandmother, family member and friend of the villagers in this village and other not-so-far-away villagers as well. With no rain in sight, the beauty of the sunshine was staggering and beautifully beautiful. Actually, the amazingly beautiful contrast could be seen that caused the death of the village queen when rain fell for several days many months ago. As the body of the deceased lay in her room, the carpenters were doing the final touches and decorations to the cedar board casket. The coffin was made from African cedar wood and well polished, with a marvelous reddish color and art designs on the outside to show beauty and love for the deceased. One could see that no expense was spared in its production and design. while items of clothing and personal belonging, like clothing and jewelry, would be carried to be placed in the tomb for a beautiful send-off for this beloved person, this lovely woman. While the food for the final day of eating was being cooked on the wood fire under the cooking hut and on several rock stones on the outside in the yard. The night before, the revilers drank fermented palm wine, banana wine, rye wine, and eat various food provisions while they sang, danced, and wailed to the beat of the Congo drums and the talking drums, deep into the wee hours of the early morning. Chief Loigus Apaimai walked on the old dirt road up toward the horse and mule stable. He took a few deep breaths and exhaled to help relieve the stress from his head, mind, neck, body, and lungs. As he walked, he took in the sights and sounds of the summer thrills. Birds chirping merrily in the trees, singing their melodious and happy morning songs. Insects buzzing about, and the soft rustling of leaves in the gentle breeze came forcefully to his remembrance of how for many years he walked this same path many times early in the mornings, holding hands with his beloved wife and the mother of 8 of his children, his Queen First Lady Amaria Apaimaimai. But today, it was a different day, and a sad story indeed. Yes, she was gone for good. He pondered in his sad heart and mind that everything she touched during her lifetime turned to gold. He could only hold his head high and keep his heart strong for his children and grandchildren. She is gone, but will certainly not be forgotten. Suddenly, he shucked off the negative feeling and whistled his favorite tune as he walked towards his horses, eager to see them again. He stopped at the horse carrel and petted his favorite horse, Willie. For many years, every morning, the sight of his horses had made his eyes light up. And seeing his favorite horse every morning since his wife died lifted his mood immediately, no matter what mood he was in. But this morning, it did the complete opposite, because he walked alone on the day of his wife's burial. Today, she would be buried in the ground out of his reaching touch. After spending some time at the horse corral, touching and petting his horses and mules, he then headed back toward his beautiful hut house where his dearly departed wife lay as stiff as a fire stick. He stopped by her bed and gently touched and stroked her forehead and kissed her hand. From another room, he could hear the sobbing of some of his children coming from the room. He knocked on the side of the doorway and parted the curtain that separated the room one from the other, and hugged his children and comforted them one by one. There was now no sparkle or happiness in the children's eyes, only sadness, but they knew that if their father was strong, indeed, they would be all right, and he has always been strong. But now that his main wife and the queen and mother of many of his children are dead, he must decide which of the other 4 wives will be the primary wife and the next queen of his life. At this point, one of his 3 female servants called him to come to the table to eat his breakfast. He responded and had a hearty breakfast of rice, steamed fish with curry, and pieces of chicken. He went outside and sat on one of the bamboo and stick benches, took a nap, and was refreshed. He then walked to the river with 2 of his dogs, took a bath, and went back home and started getting ready for the funeral of his queen, his wife, and his children's mother. With the help of one of his sons, he adorned himself with his newly made ceremonial dress, the kente formal dress, with its corresponding headwear for uniformity and social authority. It was now 12:30 p.m. in the afternoon, and everything was ready for the procession and the march to the ancestral burial ground. The beautifully finished coffin with colors and decorations that typified a wholesome life for the deceased was delightfully satisfying to all, and especially to her husband. Now the coffin was placed on the shoulders of 6 pallbearers or casket bearers, and as they started walking toward the burial ground, the singers, dancers, and mourners started the procession toward the cemetery. After a few hundred feet, he stopped for a moment of quick reflection, and everyone behind him also stopped. Even the coffin bearers ahead were signaled to stop as well. As he stood there in a pensive, vacant, yet somber mood, he was cultivating a rhythm of reflection. That, after 40 years of loving marriage, reality finally hit him. That his loving wife was dead, and she would never sleep in his bed again. He would never cuddle up in the warmth of her body during the cold nights, and would never ensure that his meals were palatable and delicious. She understood every detail of his life, his likes and dislikes, and everything in between when she was alive, but now she was dead. However, he took consolation that he still had 4 other wives, and that assurance would ease the emotional and psychological pain of losing his queen, the village mother and midwife. Then one of his sons, his first son who was in line to be the village chief after him, stood by him and gently embraced his shoulder and said in the Fulu Fulani language, "Chief Lomdo, Father Baba, this is a road that we all must travel, so take heart and keep strong, because each person's days upon the earth is like a shadow that passes before our eyes." The chief then replied, "Meda wo ase meba." "Thank you, my son," as he rested his right hand upon the hand of his son. Sometimes an eldest son does not become chief after his father, but according to the will or appointment of the father, or it may be the wisest son who would get the nod and would become the village chief in the father's stead. The eldest son, like in the case of Abraham and Ishmael being the firstborn, did not get the full blessing, but rather the second son Isaac, who God wanted to be the custodian of the family after Father Abraham. He was the one who got the blessing to be the chief and leader of the Israeli family clan. But in this case, his firstborn son Kofi would be the heir apparent to be the village chief after his father the Chief Loigus Apayame. Then the chief started walking again and caught up to his space and spot in the line as the marching continued toward the burial ground. Nevertheless, according to ancient African custom, the funeral procession would stop every now and then on the way to give the singers time to sing, the mourners time to mourn, and the dancers time to dance to the rhythm of the musical instruments, before continuing again. This was a major part of the march of the ancient processional dogmas. When the procession finally got to the burial ground, there was already a sea of people there. It was an amazing sight to behold. The procession was indeed a show of support from the community and villagers far and near. This final rite of passage signifies the transition between life and death, and this procession puts the entire community on notice that one of their own had died. The various colors of the male and female dresses were really astonishing and beautifully beautiful. The funeral procession stopped right before a beautifully decorated and half-finished gravestone monument. The full funeral ceremony would take place right there at the graveside, at the ancestral burying ground for the family. The one who was appointed by the chief to be in charge of the burial took over the program. Then, after a short fanfare, several village leaders spoke the deceased's name with goodwill, praise, and affection. Then there was singing, dancing, and other religious literary speeches. Those village leaders realized that words and actions have power, so they spoke in positive and uplifting utterances toward the chief's deceased wife. With colorful and exotic beads around the deceased neck shows the elegant farewell and send-off the village nurse was getting, who was loved by hundreds of people in the surrounding villages. Those beads were the quality worn by the rich and famous of the day. Actually, ancient African expensive beads were often made from local and natural materials like turtle shells and ostrich eggshells, also stones, various kinds of bone, and ivory. Those expensive beads she wore were not just for decorative purposes, but held significant cultural and social meaning, often reflecting a person's status, love, affection, lineage, or ritual practices. Somehow, the news had been spread abroad to the slave merchants about this special grand funeral. So today could be a lucky day for the slave practitioners, and in their mad rush for success, they came with a small group of 45 slave merchants, plus 5 catchers only. 250 persons at the graveyard, men, women, boys, and girls, the young, the old, and the shaky, some with walking sticks and some on crutches. But beneath the noise of the upcoming burial was the shadow of death by betrayal and the love of money and fame. But today, at this grand celebration of life, for someone special, mistakes will be made, and many people will die. But who? Thanks for watching, and watch out for the second installment entitled Massacre at the Graveyard at the Foothills of Cameroon, West Central Africa.